So, hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at Endagala, which is some ruins in near the monastery here in Sri Lanka. And so I thought to record a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. So I thought that maybe we could start with just a little meditation. So we can lean forward a little bit and arch the spine, excuse me, and look about 3 feet in front and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose, around the face, can just let those relax. And can relax any patterns of tension around the cheeks, around the chin. And can practice breathing in and out from this area at the tip of the nose. And when breathing in and out from the tip of the nose, can be helpful to change one's perception of the breath. So that it's not just air that one is pulling in and out of the lungs, but it's a kind of energy that's all around and coursing through one's body. And it's possible to pull it into and out of every pore. Almost like the body was a big sponge. So on the in-breath, one can think whole body. On the out-breath, one can think whole body. One can practice breathing in and out with the whole body. and can open our eyes and do a short reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So hello everybody, and hope that are having a great day wherever it might be. And so got a question from suttas.com a while back, and he sent 4 questions. This was actually the second question that he sent, but I recorded a video about it, but then realized, okay, this question's more complicated than had originally thought. So thought to try to record a video about it a bit later. And so the question that he asked was, in one of the suttas, the Buddha, there's this monk whose name is Channa, and he uses, kind of paraphrasing the question here, but he ends up killing himself. And the Buddha says that he did so blamelessly. And some people take this to mean that the Buddha had agreed to the concept of suicide. And he asks, how can we explain to those people that this is not so? And so basically there's kind of 3 cases in the canon where monks commit suicide. One is with Venerable Channa, and he was really sick, I think, and Sariputta goes to him and tries to convince him not to commit suicide. And then another monk, Mahachunda, cross-questions him, to see if he's holding on to anything, if he has any kind of defilements. And he says, remember me as somebody who used the knife blamelessly. And so then Sariputta goes back to the Buddha, and Channa ends up killing himself. And Sariputta, tells the Buddha about this, and then the Buddha says, didn't Channa tell you that he would use the knife blamelessly? He basically says Channa was an arahant. And so there's another case where there's a monk named Vakkali, excuse me, and Vakkali is also, I think he's very sick, and he asks to see the Buddha. And the Buddha goes to see him, and he said, the Buddha cross questions him. He's like, can you fault yourself with regard to virtue? And he says no, but he's like, do you have any regrets? And I think he says, I have one regret, and is basically kind of paraphrasing here, that I haven't been able to see the Blessed One for been wanting to see the Blessed One, but never, I guess maybe never seen him. And the Buddha, that's where this famous line comes, where the Buddha says, what's the use of seeing this kind of miserable body of Akali? Whoever sees the Dhamma sees the Tathagata. So not long afterwards, the Buddha leaves, and then I think the Devas go report to the Buddha that Vakkali will have a good death, and the Buddha sends Vakkali a message and says, you're going to have a good death. And so after hearing this, so when the Vakkali hears the Buddha's going to give him a message, he's very sick, and things are getting worse for him, and he hears the Buddha's going to give him a message, take me down from my bed so I can hear the message, sitting down kind of respectfully. And then they take him outside, and he also uses the knife, which I'm not sure, it basically means kills himself with a knife, not sure in which way that's done. But again, Venerable Vakkali, the Buddha declares him to be somebody who's attained arahantship. And so then the third and kind of most, I guess you call it like hard to place case in the canon is there's a monk named Godika, Venerable Godika. And Venerable Godika, he's meditating on the slopes of this mountain. And it sounds like he's a noble disciple of some level. And he keeps being able to achieve temporary liberation, which sounds like it means the jhanas. And basically, after achieving this kind of temporary liberation, he falls away from it 7 times. After the 7th time, he says, I've fallen away from this 7 times, why don't I kill myself? And then Mara comes to the Buddha and says, save Venerable Godika from killing himself. And by the time Mara finishes talking, the Buddha checks on where Godika was. Godika's already killed himself. And then Mara says something to the Buddha, and the Buddha says that Godika had become an arahant, and he says that's how people act, because they're not attached to life. And so there he says that's how the wise act, because they're not attached to life. And so these kind of three cases, these kind of three cases make it seem like there's maybe some instances where it's okay to commit suicide. So in the first two, the monks were severely ill. In the third, Venerable Godika was not advancing in his meditation, and he committed suicide. And it seems like he may have attained nibbana after, in the interval between mortally wounding himself and dying. Although the canon doesn't say, it just says that he'd kind of, the Buddha checked where he was, and he realized he'd become an arahant. But the beginning of the sutta clearly says that he wasn't an arahant at that time. So then there's a couple other cases in the canon. So this one actually takes a bit longer, because the question ended up being more complicated to think about than I'd realized. Excuse me. And the couple other cases in the canon are, there's one where, a monk is, I think it's in the Therigatha. I think there's a case from the Therigatha and the Therigatha, where there's maybe a monk and a nun, and both of them are monks and nuns for like 25 years or something like that. At least in the monk's case, I can't remember the nuns. But in any event, he can't achieve anything. He doesn't have even a finger snap worth of calm, paraphrasing. And so, basically he's been living the holy life all this time and hasn't gotten any good results from it. And so he thinks, why don't I use the knife? Why don't I kill myself? And then he picks up a razor blade, and as he's picking it up and maybe going to kill himself, he achieves final nibbana. So in that case, that monk didn't die. It was before he killed himself. He achieved nibbana before he killed himself, so he didn't complete it. And I think the case with the bhikkhuni might have been the same. So those are the kind of cases that are that people might cite. Then there's also, so that's the case in the suttas. The Vinaya is a lot less ambiguous. Or those are a few of the cases in the suttas. The Vinaya is a lot less kind of ambiguous about it. There was this one time when the Buddha taught all the monks this meditation on like the loathsomeness of the body. And then he went away for retreat for, I think, 2 weeks, and said, don't have anybody disturb me except the person who brings me food. And so after going away for 2 weeks, the monks were doing loathsomeness of the body. They became so disgusted with their bodies, became so disgusted with their bodies that they started killing themselves, and they started, asking each other to kill one another. And then there was this one kind of monk who they describe as like a sham monk. His name was Migalasakar or something. I can't 100% remember it now, but he was apparently, according to the commentary, an assassin before he became a monk, and or an executioner or something. And so he, the monks would go to him and say, "Please kill us. Our bowl and robes will be yours." And then he kept killing all these monks and taking their bowl and robes in between. And the sutta consistently describes him as a sham recluse for basically doing this. And so the Buddha comes out of retreat, and Venerable, and he asks, why is the Sangha of monks so thinned out? Because apparently on some days, like 10 monks would commit suicide, some days 20 monks, some days like 60 monks, and apparently it was like a big community of monks with hundreds of monks. But when the Buddha came out of retreat, there was hardly any monks left, or very, much thinned out, at least. And so he says, why is the Sangha so thinned out? And Venerable Ananda says, well, this is what happened. The Blessed One had given these instructions, and the monks became humiliated, and they killed themselves, they killed each other. And then the Buddha hears this, and then Venerable Ananda asks if he can give a different topic of meditation besides loathsomeness of the body. And so this is when the Buddha gives the teaching on Anapanasati. Might be a different time than the Anapanasati Sutta, but it seems like this might be the first time that he kind of officially teaches it, at least teaches it in a large way to the monks as an alternative way to go all the way to Nibbana. And so after that, he kind of reprimands the monks, and he says, how could these, like foolish or worthless men or something like that, is like, okay, how could they kill themselves, kill one another, and approach Migalandika, I can't remember his name exactly, and say, please kill us, our bowl and robes will be yours. And so in doing this, he basically, then he says, it's not fitting, it's not suitable, it's not proper, it's not allowable, it's not to be done, not worthy of a recluse. So how could these foolish men kill themselves, kill one another? And then that's when he lays down the third parajika rule, which is basically if one person kills another person, then if a monk kills another human being, then he's defeated. He's no longer a monk. So even in the case where a monk recommends suicide to somebody, if they were to say to them something like, there's these cases in the canon where monks commit suicide, you should commit suicide too, or something like that. If they said that, the person committed suicide, then that person would be no longer a monk. So that's, how seriously the Buddha took this advocation for suicide. There's another instance in the canon where there's a monk who becomes kind of tormented with I think sensual lust, and this is in the Vinaya, and he jumps off a cliff to kill himself. But I think he lands on another monk and ends up killing that monk. And so the Buddha lays down a rule: you shouldn't throw yourself off a cliff. So that's also in the Vinaya. You think you get a dukkata for it, for trying to kill yourself, or for throwing yourself off a cliff, apparently with the intention to kill yourself. And then additionally, there's this sutta where there's this prince, his name is Payasi, and there's a monk whose name is Venerable Kumara Kassapa. He's one of the Buddha's foremost disciples. Can't remember what it was in now that he's the foremost in, but he's a very good debater. So the prince comes to him and he's a skeptic, and he's debating with him about whether or not there's an afterlife. And if anybody, that's a neat sutta to read, as you can see the kind of debating skill of the Venerable Kumara Kassapa. And Prince Payasi comes up with all these different ways to try to argue that there's no afterlife, and Kumara Kassapa keeps refuting them. But one of the things that Prince Payasi says, is that, if there is an afterlife, why don't all these people who've made merit, why don't they go kill themselves and then go to heaven right away? And Venerable Kumara Kassapa gives a simile. He says, imagine, I can't remember if he says imagine this or if this was something that actually happened, but he says, imagine there's a Brahmin with, paraphrasing here, 2 wives, and one wife has kind of already had a son, another wife is pregnant, and if that wife has a son, he inherits part of the Brahmin's fortune. If they have a daughter, then she would join another family and wouldn't inherit part of that Brahmin's fortune. And so the first wife, who's already got the son, starts kind of like poking the second wife, like, and kind of, I don't know, verbally harassing her or something. And so the second wife, thinking, I'm going to find out if I have a son or a daughter, cuts open her stomach and to see if it's a boy or a girl. And in doing so, brings both herself and the child to ruin. And so Venerable Kumara Kassapa says, in the same way, basically somebody who's made a lot of merit but then decides to kill themselves, they kind of, destroy themselves, destroy their merit. So there was this kind of interesting sutta, or this interesting story I heard actually from a senior monk who I really respect, and it was when he first went to Thailand. I think he was just 1 or 2 reigns at the time. And I think it was his first dana at the temple or at the monastery, where he was staying. And so he goes into the dana, and there's all these monks sitting around, and they bring in this woman with amulets all around her neck, and she's just thrashing all over the place. And so then they start doing this kind of paritta chanting in the Thai tradition. In other traditions, they have this kind of water. They chant with parittas, and then they dip this aspergillum in, and they sprinkle people with water. And he said every time the woman got sprinkled with water, then it would be like an electric shock went through her. And they kept doing this, and eventually she passed out. And then eventually, he said after they passed out, then they just brought out the dana, and the monks started eating. Just kind of this passed out person in the middle of the floor. And in any event, eventually, I guess the dana finished her. So when she woke up, she started speaking in a man's voice. And they asked, what are you doing in this body? You can't stay here. And the man's voice said, that he was living in the village. He was a person from the village, and he committed suicide. And he saw that he was going down to hell, and he noticed this girl was kind of usually a little, maybe not so focused, maybe a little bit daydreamy. And so he jumped into her body. He was able to, take it over. And so, maybe not take it over completely, but influence her. And so they said, well, you can't stay here, so they kind of drove him out. But the amazing thing was that in that village, the parents of that person had lied and said that he hadn't committed suicide. They said he died in an accident. But when they got pressed after that, they admitted that, yes, he committed suicide. And there was another case with the same Ajahn. His teacher was very psychic, and some of his students were very psychic as well. And he had one student who was a really virtuous person, and as far as I remember the story, and she ended up committing suicide. Something happened in her life, maybe got depressed or so, and ended up committing suicide. And he said she went to this kind of like unusual place, kind of like a weird, it wasn't a good realm anyway. There's apparently, the canon lists a few places you can go, but apparently it's like a sketch of the cosmos. There's, it's much more vast than that. And this person went to a kind of a bad place. And so then one of his students he sent to go and find that person. One of his students, I think, had psychic powers and went and found her where she was, and then reminded her of all these good deeds that she did. And so then she was able to kind of leave that realm after, getting out of that state. But apparently it can last quite a long time. So in these kind of cases, so we've got the 3 cases in the canon where it seems like the Buddha is saying, it's okay, these monks were arahants, they could do it. And there's a case of Venerable Godika where he didn't even seem to be an arahant, and he seemed to commit suicide, and maybe in the final moments of his death attained arahantship. But one of the things about these cases is that these are people who are really far advanced on the path. So there's these 8 kinds of noble beings. There's, stream enter, or the one on the path to stream entry, stream enter, one on the path to once return, once returner, one on the path to non-return, non-returner, one on the path to arahantship and arahantship. And a person who's on the path, it means that their karma has gathered such momentum, apparently, that they can't die without achieving final nibbana. So what this basically shows is that in the canon, one of the ways you can, maybe the best way to take this is that basically there's many things that arahants can do, that it's possible. It is possible for arahants to commit suicide. For somebody who's an arahant to commit suicide, that's possible. It also seems like, it didn't say with the case of Venerable Godika, but maybe somebody who's very advanced on the path. At least in Venerable Godika's case, it's pretty unclear. But, maybe he's already very close to Nibbana, or maybe he was already sick too, the canon doesn't say. But in any event, it's possible that in his dying moments after committing suicide, he attained Nibbana. So one of the things for this is that, again, these people are all kind of very advanced on the path. And so that wouldn't kind of apply to the modern day situation where a lot of the times, it seems at least, when people commit suicide in the modern day, it's not because they have so much desire for the Dhamma and they're already, past the point of being a non-returner, close to being an arahant, or already an arahant, and they commit suicide. It's maybe more like, there are elements in modern culture that maybe lack some of the, could possibly be lack some of the supports that were in culture in pre-modern times, kind of strong family support, strong community support, strong religious support. And so people can sometimes end up being very lonely, without the kind of supports to keep them up through the hard times. This is one thing. Another thing is that sometimes in the modern day, people tend to have this attitude towards life that their life is, it's almost like a customer satisfaction model, where you're living and you deserve a certain level of happiness, and it's like ordering some food, and if you don't get the food you want, you can kind of send it back. So there was one friend of mine, and or one person I know, and definitely a nice fellow, but he was in Canada, euthanasia is now legal, and he was talking about how he was like thinking if he ever got Alzheimer's or something, he would get euthanized. And he said, yeah, he was describing how he would like go up to heaven while listening to like his favorite music or something like that. And so, you know, the attitude behind this, in some cases, I also saw another video on euthanasia with a very rich man who committed euthanasia, or who was euthanized in Britain. Definitely not always going to be rich people who do this, but all the time it seems like people feel like either I've got an illness that's only going to get worse, or my pain is only going to get worse in the cases of euthanasia. And so they figure, well, I'll just pull the plug now and go to some really peaceful place. But in the Buddha's way of thinking, we can remember the example of Venerable Kumara Kassapa, his simile, which is basically that the people who do this don't usually end up finding that ease that they want. It's also in some cases there can be this behind the scenes attitude that we are all just obliterated with the death of our brain, which again is not in the Buddhist viewpoint. The Buddhist viewpoint, our kind of karma continues on, whatever karma we do. So there's this other sutta with Venerable Mahanama the Sakyan, and he asked the Buddha, I'm kind of, if I'm, very busy doing all these various things, and excuse me, and he says, doing all these things, if I'm kind of on the way, my mind is, in a bad space or whatever, and I'm killed by, random accident, then what would my fate be? And the Buddha says, well, think of it like if there's a tree, paraphrasing here, that's leaning all the way over from being blown in the wind in one direction. Whichever way the wind blows, when the tree falls, then that tree will fall in that direction. So Venerable Mahanama was a stream winner, apparently, as far as I remember. And so basically the force of his good deeds, would help to carry him through. So one of the ways this kind of principle can be carried through, it's very strong in some of the meditation traditions, is that the way that a person's mind state is in the moments before their death, the intentions that they have at the time of their death, have a strong impact on their future rebirth. Although it can be a bit like the tree, and kind of, blowing in one direction, kind of keep blowing. But depending on the strength of the intention, that can reverse or delete or seriously alter previous good karma a person's made. And so it can be a bit like a person going to sleep. If a person's generally a peaceful person, generally a calm person, generally a kind person, then usually they sleep well. They have good sleep, they have good dreams, they wake up easily. But if, for some reason, one night before they go to sleep, that person gets into a horrible fight with their, say, oldest friend from a long time, maybe from their childhood, or gets into a horrible fight with their partner, and they decide they're going to get a divorce that night, and their partner divorces them, or they get angry, and, they have this kind of very unskillful motive right before they sleep, then their sleep that night can be very terrible, and their waking up can also be terrible too. And so it's the same thing as well with, can be the same thing as well with this act of committing suicide. A person, especially in the modern day, when people often want to commit suicide to escape from the pain they're feeling in their life, they don't want to, or it can be the case that they may not see a way out of this kind of pain, and so feel like suicide is a way out. But in the Buddhist view, this won't be a way out. It will probably lead to much greater levels of pain and suffering than what they're experiencing in this life. Levels of pain and suffering that can last for a very, very long time after that. Much, much longer than kind of a normal human lifespan. Kind of the Buddha sometimes describes it as, some of these realms, it's not easy to count how long you stay there in terms of thousands of years or tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years. So therefore, we shouldn't take these few examples in the canon where, say, arahants or people who seemed very advanced on the path committed suicide. We shouldn't take them and formulate a general principle that the Buddha somehow said suicide was okay. And in fact, we should take his instructions to the monks those are important. The instructions to the monks are very important. The ones he gave after the monks had been committing suicide, and said, how can these foolish men kill themselves? How can they kill one another? How can they approach the sham recluse, how can they approach Migalandika and say, kill us, friend, our bowl and robes will be yours? He says it's not fitting, not suitable, not to be done, not worthy, not allowable. It's kind of this long list. I can't remember all the words. And then he lays down a Parajika rule against it. But perhaps most importantly, in the modern context, we should consider Venerable Kumara Kassapa's simile to Prince Payasi, which is that a person who commits suicide, it's like this kind of Brahmin lady who, if she waited till till it was natural for her to give birth, she could find out if her child was boy or girl. Child could grow up healthy, she could be healthy, and everything could be well. Although birth can be painful, giving birth can be painful, being pregnant can be very difficult from what I've heard. And in the same way, when a person comes to the end of their life, when a person has difficulties in life, these can be painful, these can be difficult, these things can be hard to bear. But the escape from those things isn't suicide. Kind of killing oneself is not an escape from those difficult emotions. It's not an escape from the difficulties that one faces in life. In fact, it can be like a person going to sleep and kind of have this very bad intention before one sleeps. One's dreams are bad. One wakes up in a bad place, a place that's much worse. So the true escape from the difficulties that people face in life, from these things that might make a person want to commit suicide, isn't a physical end to the life of the body. It's an ending to the attachment that causes suffering. It's an ending to the craving that causes suffering. It's an ending to the ignorance that causes suffering. And all these things can be ended through training the mind. They can be ended through training the mind in such a way that regardless of whether one is in a mortal illness, regardless of whether one is having extreme difficulties in one's life, all those things can be turned into objects of contemplation for the Dhamma. And so actually in the modern era, there's some monks, especially in the Thai forest tradition, there's one monk, at least he attained Nibbana when he had a potentially mortal case of malaria. And it was only by practicing through that he, I think it was right after he finally got through the bout of malaria, that he attained Nibbana. And it's the same way with one's life. If one perseveres using the Buddha's teachings to overcome the various difficulties that arise in one's life, then no matter how daunting they are, it's kind of a bit like this kind of weather. Kind of weather can have a big storm, but so long as one weathers a storm, the storm passes and it becomes bright again. Or it can be compared a bit to these various difficulties that one might face in the course of the day if one kind of remains calm. One doesn't get angry at one's spouse. One doesn't, try to end the friendship with one's best friend, in the middle of the day, towards the end of the day, especially right as one is going to sleep. One doesn't develop these unskillful actions. Then even if bad things happen during the day, then one sleeps well. One has good dreams, and when one wakes up, one is happy. One is at ease. And in the same way, for a person who lives their life right through, who practices the Dhamma, who uses every moment to practice the Dhamma, they can weather these storms. They can see the bright days after that, and if they pass away, when their time comes, they sleep well, and they wake up in a good place, which is something that they don't regret. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and hope that everybody has a great day, and wishing you all the best till next time.